Today, we're really honored to be joined by Professor Françoise Vergès, who will present the argument of her most recent book, A Feminist Theory of Violence. I'm lucky I got a proof from Pluto. It's out next month with Pluto Press in English, and it's been out. Today, we're really honored to be joined by Professor Françoise Vergès. Sorry. That was my live stream. There you go. I've closed it now. It's for the questions. So Françoise Vergès is a political scientist, an activist, and a public educator. She holds a PhD in political science from Berkeley. And her work is deeply anchored in a commitment to justice and liberation. It focuses on post-colonial studies and decolonial feminism. Her work is far too wide for me to exhaustively account for in a very short introduction, but I'll give you some clues. So some of her previous books include The Wombs of Women, Race, Capital, and Feminism, out with Duke University Press, and A Decolonial Feminism that came out last year with Pluto, that are both available in English. Many, many more are in French. She's produced movies on Aimé Césaire and Marie Scondé, and as an independent curator has organized exhibitions on enslavement and Haiti in various museums in France. On a personal basis, The Decolonial Feminism was one of the most formative books I've ever read on feminism. So I'm so glad that she's joining us today. So Françoise, thank you so much. If you want to take it away now, it'll be great, and we'll have questions later in the chat, or you can raise your hands. Françoise, over to you.
Well, thank you for a very generous introduction. Yes, so I mean, the book was written in 2020, and as you remember, that was a moment of the murder of George Floyd, but also of a lot of, putting down statues, but also of the confinement and COVID-19. Mobilization in Mexico and Chile against rape and for abortion rights. Incredible, so on the one side, a lot of violence from the state and police violence and race violence and violence against women. And on the other hand, an incredible mobilization with a, demand more for social justice, reparation, and the end of violence against women. So all this was, in my mind, and I saw also growing more and more demand from feminists, from white bourgeois feminists, to call them, demand for more laws of protection, multiplying the law. And I also noticed that there were more and more laws also for protection of children, more and more discourse about how to protect children, more and more also books on the psychology of children, and also the question of care and how to protect women. And I saw that, more and more of these laws, more and more of this discourse, and at the same time, this increasing violence. And I did not see that as being opposed to each other, but in fact as a double politics that was not, in fact, that surprising and was historically based. So the femicide, the systemic violence, the rape, the state of permanent war, I did not want to see it as something, like men are bad, And I remember for me the song of Las Tesis in Chile, if you do remember this group, saying the rapist is you, it's the cops, the judge, the state, the president. The oppressive state is a macho rapist. And I think, oh, that's very interesting. This bringing together of this, and the question of the state as being, in fact, the initiator of race and protector. That it is the principal instigator of inequality, it protects capital, it leaves police violence and racial crime unpunished, it supports the arms industry, it militarizes the public space, and so why should we turn to the state to protect us? The second question, for me was like, then what will be protection? What is protection that will not be state patriarchal protection? Because I do think that we do need protection, and children need protection, elderly people, some, people who are sick. There are a lot of situations when, in fact, protection is part of the human life, of empathy. So on the one hand, the state, capital, are not innocent in the fact of producing violence, of, a global state of violence also, for me, connected with neoliberalism and its economy of extraction and exploitation, leading today to what some people call the Anthropocene, and I rather call racial capitalocene, but the point. How this, is also, we are living more and more in an uninhabitable planet, that the zone, what Fanon called the zone of non-being, are multiplied, what Fanon called that, you say that, sorry, slavery and colonialism have traced a line, has created a zone of non-being. So above the line of non-being, you have those who are protected by laws, civil laws, social laws, rights, and they are mostly European. And below that are those who are considered subhuman. And so that zone of non-being, he analyzed it in the colony, but I saw it also being extended even to Europe and elsewhere. It was not just in the colony, or not just against even, in the ghetto or the township, but also even, in Europe. I was also, for instance, that this question of the climate disaster and this uninhabitable planet. I mean, this form of violence, the visible form of violence and the less visible or invisible, in fact, form of violence. I was, the fact that COVID was attacking the lungs, and there was a question of breathing, and there was like the connection with I can breathe in police violence. So this question of breathing also, and also for me, became important. And when I learned that more people die of air pollution every year, I mean, this is the World Health Organization, than of any other cause, that question also of violence, through the creation of unbreathing, of the politic of unbreathing, how could I analyze that? So what I mean is like, there was like the fabrication of an uninhabitable planet, of unbreathing politics, of the politic of exhaustion also, that of course we could see during COVID. I was in France at the time, and there was the confinement was in March 2020, there was those who will be confined, and of course there was a lot of debate about that, and quite quickly you saw in the newspaper people talking about what it meant, that finally they could think about their life, reflect on what they wanted, rather doing a garden than working. I mean, there was all this reflection, and like practically no word about that possibility rested on the fact that a lot of people were not protected. Those who were delivering the food, those who were in the supermarket, they were still cleaning the place. So that separation between those who are protected and those who were not protecting, that made the life of the protected possible, was also very important for me. And I remember writing a piece at the time, because I was like practically 2 days after confinement was decided by the French government, saying, what is that? And for me, it rested on an economy that is historically grounded. The good life is possible because so many people are exploited, and also sent, with unprotected. And so for me, it was also to look at how this has been constructed historically. So I did not want to look there even, answer to the question of women being victim and men being perpetrator. But I wanted to look at violence as a structural element that is absolutely historically tied to European modernity and capital. It's not that violence did not exist, of course, outside of Europe. Of course, violence that existed, and states have been violent. But the point is like how it became a global regime, and at how that violence, of course, allowed one part of the world to become wealthy, Europe, of course, and to develop the idea of what was a good life. That we can call it, the colonial way of life, or perhaps today the imperialist way of life. The possibility of, of getting that. And for instance, just an example, to show that, how it's important to look at that. I remember when I was at the head of the president of the National Committee for the Memory and History of Slavery in France, a lot of French were telling me, we have nothing to do with slavery. Our ancestors were neither slave owner nor slave traders. And it's true, it's absolutely true. So my point was like how, I could explain it was connected, nonetheless to them, regardless of their, the ancestor, the responsibility of the ancestor. And that connections through the good life, this is what I did, that the fact that, for instance, I talk about sugar when sugar, and coffee and tobacco became, in fact, quite popular, not just for the aristocracy or the bourgeois class, and that made life better for a lot of people. You have also this work on how sugar pacified the working class in some places. But so my point was like this good life was available to many more and more people in Europe, and it was based on the plantation and the exploitation. So it was not the point like, oh, you are guilty or whatever. It was to see how this was organized. So violence really as a structural element. So then again, why the state has captured more and more the question of protection. So you do have the protection that was obtained through struggle, for social laws, for number of hours that would be work, or leaves or things like that. That are effectively laws, social laws that we could connect with a form of protection, protecting the health, protecting, from being exhausted. Even though this is not full protection, because to this day, for instance, if we look at France, I don't know for the UK, but in France, for instance, people who have, of the working class have shorter years of living than, any person professional, higher of the bourgeoisie. So this question of the protection, of what it means, the protection by the patriarchal racist state was not protection. Another thing also, so I look at that, of this, how protection has been constructed and has been captured by the state, how even in the colonialism, there were criminalization, but also in Europe, of course, not of course, but also in the criminalization to protect, the criminalization in the name of protection. So for instance, criminalization of homosexuality or criminalization of, of course, of abortion and criminalization also of other form of making kinship and community. And we know that was very strong under slavery, where kinship and community were forbidden. Enslaved and slave were forbidden to make kinship and community. And how even to this day, family arrangements that are not within heteronormative, heteronormative frame are criminalized, and how the state gave itself the freedom to intervene in family life and to say, this is not good, and what is a good mother, what is a bad mother, what is a good father, what is a good education for children. And I gave in the book a lot of examples that, in the 20th century and also to this day, what it is. So what will be an anti-racist, anti-patriarchal feminist politic of protection? That was also the question I raised in the introduction that, after. And again, the regime that need violence to survive, against effectively this systemic violence that has not disappeared, because even today you still have plantations that are still, absolutely designed on the model of the colonial plantation. Rape and murder and violence are systemic in this plantation. They are element of domination. They are not just because something is happening. It's not for repression. It's part of the daily life of a plantation. So how to all these elements, how to look at that? Should we multiply then the laws of protection and has the state or the police or the army to protect us? Or, what will be? But then again, who will be protected even? Because protection is not universal and is not neutral. Prison already has always been for the poor, for the racialized, for the Black, for the Muslim today, and for the migrant today, and even for the refugee, though we saw recently that it depends who are the refugee. We can remember last year on the Belarus-Poland border, we know all these refugees, the thousands of refugees from Syria and Afghanistan and others who were pushed in the forest, in sub-freezing temperature, in the forest of Belarus or of Poland, and many died in the forest, or what we have seen today also, following the invasion of Ukraine, the difference made between the refugee who Europeans see as European and the other, the African, for instance, student, all of you have read that, and how even the war in Ukraine has been presented as a war against civilization, and it's not the same thing in Iraq and Syria. So this question, so we have to protect them, we have to welcome them, all this is, the naturalization of a certain racial line within the laws of protection. Even for the children, for instance, as much as we hear about protection of children and children need to be protected and crime against children are terrible, we know that there is no universal conception of childhood. There are a lot of children in the world who are not considered children and who are treated as adults, in terms of, even in terms of repression and prison. We can think about the Palestinian children, but we can think also about Black children, brown children, Muslim children. In Europe, the fact that studies show you that they are not treated the same way as white children in the prison, in the carceral system, or even in the social, work system. So those who, despite their age, are treated as adults. And the Palestinian legal scholar Nadira Cherub-Kevorkian called that unchilding. The process of unchilding, of taking away, like the conception of being. So that process through which the states unchild some children, and so they can be treated as adults. And that is naturalized. So again, this the multiplication of law to protect on the one hand, and on the other hand, more violence, more and more violence, and more effectively treatment of women, men and children as in fact disposable. So for me it was, what is it again, how to understand this incredible production of violence. And I thought also what is to become a man, what is proposed, or rather what is a proof of becoming a man, is to show your capacity to torture and to kill. And this is, there is a work of this Mexican feminist, Valencia, who talk about that, about why joining gangs in Mexico is part of effectively proving the possibility of becoming a man. And proving that you're a man will come through the murder and dismembering of women and throwing them on garbage, because that will allow you. So even that is the only possibility for a young man of, a poor young man in Mexico to enter. But then she also showed that in fact, this is a visibility of violence of men, and this is what appear in the media, but she showed also that how, for instance, there is the more invisible or less visible violence of corporation in Mexico or US corporation or other, and that this is a system that the country has been looted and exploited. Of course, so how all this connect, all this create effectively an inevitable violent planet. How effective female bodies, trans, queer, sex workers are treated as garbage, But is not then capitalism the production of garbage, the production of incredible ton, of garbage, and the fabrication of disposable people, of plants, animal, and what is called nature that can be, disposed of. And for me, what Ruth, the Black theorist, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, has called the fact that capitalism is a fabrication of differentiated vulnerability to premature death. By that, differentiated vulnerability, differentiated by race or by age, or by what you belong to premature death. So there is this fabrication, the fact that effectively there is a naturalization then to premature death that has nothing to do with biological death or the fact that, but it has to do with effectively that your life will be shortened already, when you are born, because you are born there and you are born in that class. And I think, this notion of premature death, the fabrication of premature death, is very important to understand, very important to say how it's fabricated, and then how we see example of it every day. We saw it in COVID-19. Who were the people who, the rate of death was high, the rate of mortality was higher in Black community or Muslim or in poor community everywhere. Brazil, United States, UK, France, everywhere. So that's, how effectively, again, what I say earlier about the pollution of air and water will touch more, community of color than any other community. Chemical plant are, put beside poor neighborhood or Black and, brown community or autochthonous or indigenous community everywhere. So this is, that violence designates, body, again, this zone of non-being that Fanon described, designate body that can be rape, maim, torture, left with no food and no water. And there, when I talk about rape in the book, I was carefully, of course, rape target mostly in majority women. Okay, there is no, absolutely, like nothing can be, this is a fact. But then I was interested by the fact that rape has become more and more also a weapon in the arm of the police and the army against men. So for instance, in Abu Ghraib, but also in Guantanamo, and also against the Rohingya men by the Myanmar army, also in Iraq. I mean, a lot, of course, of report by humanitarian, by NGO, but also even by the CIA that you can read online, show the systematic, that. And then we may think about the body, the brown, indigenous and Black body. Of course, female will be more targeted, but also it's nonetheless, regardless of the gender or regardless, is constructed as a body to rape, absolutely to rape. And it's a constant, and it's a very, and most NGOs say it's something that is not really fully discussed because men are more ashamed to talk about it. And also because they also say there is no vocabulary also to talk about rape by men against men. So I thought that that was also very interesting so I read a lot of this report and to think about it, to reflect about it, so to show rape as if a systematic arm, a weapon of destruction. It's really of destruction, of course, of the body and the mind. So this, and then I talk about carceral feminism and how carceral feminism, the first reaction quite often we may have when we read about the horrible crime against women will be effectively, oh God, lock them up, the idea of revenge. And I talk really frankly about my own, sometime reaction, oh my God, if I could get that guy and, beat him or, lock him up, I have that. So I recognize that feeling. I absolutely acknowledge that feeling, the desire. But then the point being that, carceral feminism is not a solution. And this led me to talk about prison and how an anti-racist feminist decolonial politics of protection will be anti-carceral, of what Angela Davis and others has called abolitionism. When they talk about abolitionism is abolition of prison, abolition of all form of exploitation and exploitation. So to take again that term notion of abolition and take it away from the history of slavery and European anti-slavery and do it effectively, what is abolition? So this is, for me, was also the question of prison. And in the book, I look back also as very debates among European feminists. In Italy, a lot. Italian feminists were there was a very strong debate about prison and carceral feminism. And they became, there was, really division, especially when there was discussion about rape, the law, criminalizing rape. And so should we support very, very heavy, like sending men to, years and years of prison. And it really divided the movement. It was also some in France. In fact, I do remember, because I was already in France at the time, it was like, should we support, prison? Should we ask, what is how do we think about the criminalization of rape? Rape should be a crime, rape should be punished, but how, as feminists, should we, talk about that? And the fact that part of the movement it was pushing for the law and punishment, and part of the movement was opposed to that, by saying that we should be careful because we are giving the state a lot of power, and we are giving the police and and the prison system a lot of power, and we may regret it. But the law, I mean, those who were partisan of the law won, and in fact, that's so. What do we do, with that? And that question was also, so it's part of what I'm talking. I talk about in the book, going back to this debate, showing that this debate were already there, and they were even much earlier among Black feminists in the United States, but also among Afro feminists in Brazil. This question of the prison and the carceral feminism. So through the book, I go through that history, I examine that history, and I come to today, to learn the question of prison today. And the fact that the prison should be part, I mean, the struggle against prison, for me, in my eyes, should be part of the feminist, anti-racist feminist struggle. So at the end of the book, okay. At the end of the book, I make some. I say what will be an anti-racist politic of protection, decolonial feminism, and I talk about self-defense. I talk about like organizing, community organizing. I talk about I give some example of this. I give like also even. What it is, all this abolitionist politic today, and how it's very important to continue the struggle of, that the struggle against violence against women should not be just, by saying, men are violent, which they are, but also what is, this state of permanent war against women. And how, if we are in the struggle for an anti-racist, decolonial feminist politic of protection, it also has to look at what is masculinity, what kind of masculinity are being, suggested as being the good one, what kind of femininity also, and of course, all the violence against trans and queer belong to this also ideology about masculinities and femininity. So the book was, for me, really, I mean, really a critique of carceral feminism, an attempt to understand, violence as a systemic project, and not just, some aspect of it, but how the world is saturated by violence, and how we can develop a politic that will answer to that form of violence and work for, abolition, the abolitionism, and so work. And I suggest also that peacefulness could be an objective. That, again, the state of permanent war, which is also a state, of course, of systemic violence, what will be to live at peace? And peace, not just as this moment between two wars, and we can discuss, of course, what we are witnessing, what's happening in Europe today, but also what has been happening in Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Palestine for years now, and in Yemen as we speak, is how do we will reappropriate the notion of peace, not so as, like these geopolitical things, or this piece of paper that is being signed as an agreement between men, but as effectively a revolutionary peace, to reappropriate that, because revolutionary peace has also historically been a demand from, from the left, the real left, and from the revolutionary feminists and feminists in the global south. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Françoise. There was so much there. So I'm sure everyone has a lot of questions. If you want to put them in the chat or put your hands up, I'll start us off to give everyone time to write the questions. Well, I mean, I've got a few, but I think maybe my main one was that throughout you've been talking about violence as something that belongs to the state, and violence as, you know, something that is also used in between people. But I was wondering about violence as resistance, because of course there's such a huge history of, especially in anti-racist movements, but also in feminist movements, and even in you know, queer organizing, of violence as a means of resistance. And I'm trying to think of how, or at least I would love to know what you think about that question, and kind of how that can belong in a world that's aiming for this revolutionary peace, but also how can we kind of achieve that if we also reject violence in the way that we work? Yeah, sorry, that was a bit mumbled, but yeah.
No, it's a very important question. And I do think that we have to think about organizing, organizing, arming ourselves, you know, because rather than just using violence, you know, arming ourselves, there are moments, I mean, and we do know historically people had to harm themselves and still have to harm themselves. But what I meant by peace is not that then peace, you know, as a pacifying situation, but peace as a possibility. Even during national movement, the war of national movement, people were, you know, creating refuge and sanctuaries. Under slavery, the Underground Railroad was also creating refuge and sanctuary. You cannot live in, fighting against that violence does not mean repeating a state of permanent war, but effectively taking arms against arms. We're not going to, you know, let people ourselves getting killed. That's very important. And training, but also what I mean is like in that strategy of resistance, you have also many levels. What I mean by that is, like, for instance, when we look at the demonstration that we organized in Chile, they organize it also along what you can do or cannot do, you know. For instance, so not, you will not have the fighters and the pacifists, right? But, you know, who can be at one place. So, for instance, on the front row were those who could fight, you know, who could go against the police and fight, right? And behind were the people who were carrying water or whatever, you know, is needed. And I remember, because when I participated in some marches, it was like that, because, for instance, I don't run very well. So it's, I mean, if I am on the front row, I mean, I would get beaten by the cops right away, right? So it's rather that you know, I can be like the row behind and carry whatever, you know, need to be carried, or, you know, or also having a refuge along the march where people can, you know, come to hide. So the point is of the struggle, the resistance can be as well, you know, like forging fake paper, organizing route of escape, organizing, you know, that resistance is all this. So we have to be, when we say it's violence, it's effectively reacting against the systemic violence. But it's also, I mean, on the other side, the enemy knows only to crush and to kill and to beat people to death, right? The point is, like, of course, we can, there are this, but as we are fighting, you are also building what could be, you know, whether you think about the fight in Angola, in Guinea-Bissau, in Algeria, in, you know, everywhere, there is also always this place that, you know, another life could be also imagined and live. So this, what recently, I mean, I don't talk in that book, but more recently, I've been a lot of, you know, thinking about the new kind of refuge and sanctuary we have to build today, considering, you know, what's happening all around us, you know, and not again the refuge and sanctuary that will be built by the state and capital, because it's not just a state, you know, it's also capitalism, and therefore, you know, racism that goes with. So yes, of course, we have to organize. Yes, absolutely, we have to organize, and also I think that the struggle, and we see it. We all, I mean, every day people die. Every day people are killed. So yes, I mean, protecting against that violence is not is taking risk. Because on the other side, there is no hesitation. We saw it with all the, murder in Brazil, in the United States, in Europe. We see it. I mean, there is no hesitation to kill. The state, the police, the army, and the militia, the private militia of capital, have like no hesitation to kill. Like none. We saw Mariela Franco, Beatriz Cáceres. I mean, all these women, and especially today, activists, climate activists, indigenous climate activists are targeted and they are killed. So they don't hesitate. So yes, we have to develop any form of resistance, and some of them including learning to arm ourselves and to answer, with arms.
Yeah, that's great. What you were saying reminded me of this weekend. There was a demonstration by Sisters Uncut, which is a London-based feminist abolitionist, anti-racist radical group. And something that people talked about a lot on social is that one of the things they did as part of the demo is that they let up a lot of rape whistles, like hundreds in front of Scotland Yard. But before they did that, they distributed earplugs to everyone. And it was kind of exactly what you're talking about, is this building care within the resistance and the violence. I thought I'd link it to England. If anyone's got questions, come on in. Otherwise, me and Françoise can keep going. But I'll check the YouTube chat as well. Yeah, great. So Richard, if you want to go first, and then Isabella.
Hi, just to say thank you for a very interesting talk and for your work previously, because I used your decolonial feminism a lot in my PhD thesis on women's employment in Benin. And my question, I'm excited about your new book when it comes out, but I wonder, you were talking about kinship and violence within kinship systems. And I wondered, do you address also the gender roles that are inherent in kinship systems in the global South?
Can you say a little more? Could you say a little more?
Yeah, I guess maybe the struggle between the effect of colonization on the gender roles that are manifested in kinship systems, even in very rural areas such as the ones I'm familiar with, and to what extent is that kind of inherent, endogenous, surplus, or to what extent has that been? I'm struggling a bit with this, and I wonder.
Very interesting. Yeah. When I was talking about how the state and capital intervene in kinship, how the state will say, no, that's not a good family, that's a family, and capital destroying, because capitalism is also a logic of anti-relationality. Relation should not be possible because relation will threaten, in fact, capital. So that I was talking about that, but I do know that effectively kinship is not necessary. I mean, kinship is not in itself, like liberatory for women. And in the global South, I mean, there are studies showing that colonialism did not necessarily invent, the oppression of women, but reinforce it. Absolutely reinforce it through, for instance, even law about private property, of citizenship, the possibility, imported in the colony ideas. And this has been, effectively explored in some books where, because for a lot of European, the leader of the family can only be the man, the father, so they did not pay attention to any other form of circulation. There was, for instance, a book about psychiatry in Senegal, and French psychiatrists arrive, the father is missing, or we don't see the father, so go on and on about too much more. So men are too attached, boys are too attached to their mother because the father is missing. Really total crap. But the point is, because they did not pay attention to the fact that it's the maternal uncle that played that role. I'm not saying that this was good necessarily, but the point is, effectively this arrangement that, where that we're totally foreign to what the European brought as what is a good family, what is kinship, what is a family. Now, the fact of, I don't want to idolize either, the form of kinship that can be, but the construction of other form of kinship and community are nonetheless still hindered by the state and by capital. This is, and so the invention of new form of kinship and new form of community building, or even if we want to call them family, is effectively is part, in fact, of a lot of long reflection by feminists, as we know, and also today by queer and trans people. What would constitute, when we say family, of course, we already think about the patriarchal family, but as Black feminists, we're saying in the United States already in the 50s, 60s, that when white feminists were attacking family as being only patriarchal and coercive, they were saying, well, because you always have a family, but for us, a family was also the refuge against racism, against racism outside. So this, it's just like to be a little more, like constantly looking at different things. And so at the end, we don't have, a clean category, but we can say how effectively one affects the other, and how effectively colonialism and the modern state, the way the modern state, and we know that in Africa, they are absolutely imitating European state, is perpetuating patriarchy or domination by men that invent oppress men, as you do know, because young men, for instance, do not have total freedom. So patriarchy oppress women, and young women, of course, much more, but can also oppress young men. And I remember a discussion in Senegal some years ago where young Senegalese were saying that they had no freedom about choosing what they wanted to do, because one wanted to be a musician and the father said, no, you have to become, a civil servant because that would be safer or whatever. The point is, there was many, they express how patriarchy is really a form of oppression, is really stifling, desire and joy and form of sexuality. And, the patriarch want really to have all the members of his family under his domination, and this is patriarchy. It's not just having a father. Patriarchy is really a structure of domination among everyone, the mother, the daughter, the son, everyone. That's patriarchy. It's not just that there is a man who is a father. It's really because you do have family where the fathers will not exercise that form of brutal domination. But patriarchy give you that possibility, give men that possibility. And that patriarchy is absolutely supported by the state, by capital, and by laws, by civil laws, by laws of inheritance, by law of property, by laws of citizenship, all, the political structure, the economic, the social structure favor patriarchy. So what I will say is that what comes from colonialism, or what has been after that, there is nonetheless also still the fact that patriarchy has not been defeated and is oppressive. And it's not because it's, for instance, in Mali or something, that it will be less oppressive. But at the same time, I always say that patriarchy has been racialized. You could be a tyrant at home, you could be terrible at home, but when you will go out, you will be a Black man or an Arab man or an Asian man. That will be, so. And even today we see among the patriarchs of the world who are, leaders of the world, we see that there is a difference, between the white patriarch and the brown and Black patriarch. They don't have the same place in the, on the scene. And we see, for instance, when we see the leaders of at the big meeting, we see the totally racial hierarchy. So you have to play with all this, the fact that patriarchy is being racialized, that of course there is a class also element into it. And then within that, how our colonialism has played, but also how today it's still, being played out, and how, then the state, the post-colonial state, has not changed, colonial law. Even as you do know, in Africa, the criminalization of homosexuality by colonial powers was adopted by post-colonial state. But it was imported by the colonial power, but it was not, the post-colonial state kept them and even sometimes reinforced them.
Great. Isabel, if you want to ask your question, and then we have one from YouTube.
Yeah, hi, thank you. That was really, really interesting. It's definitely given me a lot to think about. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on abolitionism in general and like thinking about an alternative and more effective solution to kind of deal with rape that doesn't involve the prison system.
Yeah. Well, abolitionism, effectively, I think it gives us a more interesting horizon than just, talking about anti-racism as the objective. Because abolitionism is really the unfinished work of the abolition of slavery. But slavery not seen as, the plantation, but as a real system, on which still we live, on the world still live, the world fabricated by colonial slavery, and the fact that effectively people are still enslaved in the world, even if it's not the same organization, form of structure. So abolitionism is one, I don't know if it's one, but it's the unfinished promise of the abolition of slavery. So what Celia Hartman called the afterlives of slavery, that are still, there. It's also, abolitionism is really mobilizing an imagination of what would be a world without racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia. For me, for instance, it's really how we have abandoned the work of imagination, of imagining. Because we are so surrounded by normalization of inequality and injustices, and we are fighting against that it's very difficult to imagine, what could be a world without that. And on top of it, since we are pushed toward the abyss with the climate disaster and the war that are ravaging the world, we are caught into constant emergency. So we have no longer time because imagination, require time. It's not like, something like that. And so this is why I think abolitionism also will ask us hard work of imagination, an imagination that draw on everything that we know, on all the attempt to build freedom, all the attempt, to effectively to have places where something. And of course, we can turn also there to literature, not only to theory, but to literature, to poetry, to cinema, that offer something that will be, different, that would be different. So abolitionism for me is really that possibility of making that leap of imagination, that, the way slave and enslaved never surrender the idea of freedom. Never. That there will be an abolition of slavery. They will be free. They will be free, even though it lasted nonetheless, centuries. Centuries. It was much longer than colonial, that the 19th century colonialism, and nonetheless, that imagination of a world that will be without slave trade, without slave market and everything, that was. Because at the time, remember, the church is for slavery, culture is for slavery, economy is for slavery. Everything, everything has normalized slavery. It's normal. And a black person can be killed, tortured, without, the white person who killed that person being, being accused of murder or being judged. So there is, and despite all this, despite the terror, despite the daily terror and the daily torture and the daily forcing, into accepting that utopian thinking, utopian not, utopian in the sense that no, but that we will get there. We will get there. I think for me, abolitionism, it's not necessarily the theory that is, but for me, it's that I need to think that yes, one day that will be possible. And then what do I build for that? For me, for instance, when I say for me, what I do, not in terms of imagination, is for instance what we used to call public education. To do that, to do workshop, trying to develop different form of pedagogy, of working together, of collective working. That for me, that's what I can do in that abolitionist activism practice. The solution, more effective solution against rape, besides sometimes getting the rapist and beat him, which should be considered. When I say self-defense, has to be, there is sometimes that there is something that should be nonetheless, not in terms of an eye for an eye, but in terms of, that will not go unpunished. That will not go unpunished. And so what will be also, what I think, what do we need to develop so rape women can go on living? Because rape destroys deeply, right? Really deeply, not your body, but also your mind and your spirit. So what are the structures that will care, what will bring care and but really care, like deep love, not just, not just a bed and in hospital, but really deep love. And I will say, so that, I don't know if it will be more effective, but I in the book, I talk about the fact that many women who are interviewed who have been raped and that whose rapist has been punished, they express their unsatisfaction, that it does not repair them, right? It's not that, and that what will it do so that other women will not be raped, or their daughter, or their sisters, or their mother? But rape is really an incredible. It's a deadly weapon. It's absolutely not exceptional. That has to be said constantly, and nothing exceptional. It's something that is there constantly, as a threat and as a fact. So for me also, it was to look at rape as not something that could happen, or whatever, because you are 3 a.m. in the morning, outside, but that is a constant threat. So how then rape is looked at as that absolute, as an element, I'm going to say one of the important element of domination. Mm-hmm. Not just, all men who cannot help themselves, but it's in fact, because rape has been understood as having a very destructive force. Rape is destruction.
Thank you for that answer. We've got a question from YouTube that links to what you were saying just a little bit before about your work on public education and everything. So that would be great. The question is, considering backlash against decolonial/postcolonial studies in France and in the US, what are the real possibilities of contestation from within the academia?
Oh God. Good luck with that. Yeah, institutional. There is a crisis. I'm not the one to tell you this. You're fighting in your institution now, but there is an incredible attack against university against humanities all over the world, right? The far right is going, but then also there is what the left, what we can call the left, absolutely did not fight back, did not fight back, and allow finally the attack on decolonial and post-colonial studies or queer studies or, or everything in the university, or even, critical race theory. I mean, we are like reach incredible level. So I will say that there is an attack, a coordinated attack against humanities. It's not just the far right, it's even, for capital does not need humanities and social science, they need computer and, banking studies, financial studies. So, because there is a very strong conviction that humanities and social science will bring people, will, produce people who would contest and, and say that should not be like that and who would be for justice. So I always say it's a concerted global attack. So in France, the backlash, effectively, I mean, the incredible backlash, what can be done? I mean, it's very difficult because a part of the academic world, is important, finally is complicit with that, with this attack. Not from an extreme far right point of view, but from a certain point of view that this has always been like that. Who are these decolonial, post-colonial people, right? There is a universal form of knowledge, there is, humanism and so on, and this is being attacked. So we are against diversity of adversary, and some are real enemies. So what can be done? In the university itself, in the academic world, I mean, fighting, striking, occupying, but also perhaps multiplying space of reading, critical theory, of learning ourselves how to do that, how to also develop our thinking. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it asks us a lot of time, and we don't have that much time because life is, I mean, under capitalism is made so you don't have time and you're constantly tired and exhausted. But I will say that, for instance, effectively, we have to do twice or 4 times the amount of work that, others do not have to do. I mean, just an example of when I was, working so that France would recognize that France had been a slave trade power and had slave colony, I had to be constantly more knowledgeable than the people to whom I was going to talk. I knew they were ignorant, but they will always say that they knew more than I do. So I had to be incredibly arriving with so much, knowledge that, there was no possibility for them. But that means for me, a constant work. I mean, there is academic university do not provide less and less knowledge, and it's really in crisis. Really in crisis, doesn't know how to answer about the demand for decolonization of knowledge and what would be really decolonization of knowledge, what it means for why, women are not more, taught, why effectively if you are non-valid, there is no place for you at the university, why the university is subcontracting so many work, and so people who work, clean or cook are absolutely and cannot even unionize and are absolutely exploited. So the academy is a social structure. It's not just, the classroom. It's an incredible, with a direction hierarchy and quite opaque. What are really, why this decision is taken and why not. So, and quite able to hide all this behind the veneer of, of humanism and humanist education. But we have both to save it, because, not having, I mean, if university disappear, it will not be the rich kids who will be punished. It will be, the kid of, of poor class and black and brown kids, because not having, so we are caught into a certain paradox of both of not wanting them to disappear totally, because that's, I mean, every day you have kids who want to get into higher education, and, you know, saying, oh, but, you know, these institutions are terrible, we'll not help them. That's one thing. And then the other thing is, nonetheless, knowing that we have to constantly try to build parallel autonomous space of learning and teaching also. Because we have to learn also how, if we want to become teachers, what is to teach and how we want to teach. Because that's, everything is made so that you cannot, that you have to stay within, you know. I mean, even people who will come with good ideas, you know, I mean, the question of career and so on, and you get marginalized or you're afraid. And the amount of things that teachers have to do today, you know, like all this, it's part of the crushing. And the privatization also, you know, as you do know, the budget that has to be, I mean, it has to be run like a corporation. Everything is against public education. I mean, privatization has been totally against public education. So we have to save public education. I will say that one thing, because the backlash is also come from a privatization, from an institution under attack. And but that the more we let it being attacked that way, the less there is something to save almost, you know. Because at one point you say, well, should I save these things? You know, there is no place for me. So we have to protect we have to protect the idea of public education. Because what is attacked is that also. It's not just, you know, the colonial and post-colonial theory. What is attacked is public education.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting, especially I guess in the context of, as we were telling you, of the strikes and everything in the UK against privatization. Right, we've got time for maybe a couple more questions. So I don't know if anyone either here, if you want to post them on YouTube, feel free to do that. I'll also check it. Otherwise I'll just get an extra one, which is fun. But okay, well, no one's got their hands up, so Iris, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been so insightful to hear you talk. And I've been thinking, I guess, that the way in which the state sustains the structural violences that you talk about, violences of colonialism, racism, patriarchy, is also done in combination with the concept of justice, right? So violence comes together with its remedy in the state formations that we live in, right? So when you talk about imagining, you know, imagining differently, how can we imagine justice differently? I wonder if you have any ideas on that, on the concept of justice.
Yeah, that's a challenging question. I will say perhaps if we were working on the question of justice, we will have to work on what we mean by reparation. What will be to repair a damage, a wound, a crime? What is, you know, so how another conception of reparation than, you know, punishing people or making them, even though this is what we do now, and there is no reason to abandon also sometimes financial compensation for us, right? And asking that. But we know that this cannot be, this is not social justice. It's just, you know, the form of reparation that the current system of justice offers us. Okay. So what will be reparation for us? How do we repair? What do we think, you know, what would be the reparation for loss, for damage and wound, right? We have lost someone that has been killed or, you know, someone close. What do we ask? What are we asking, you know, for reparation? And we do know that quite often people who want to go to court, not asking more, for more than just recognition of the crime. That the fact that there was a crime must be recognized. And that's so Reparation can be recognition. Something has been done to me, so it's not, it's not nothing, right? I was damaged. So that recognition is one form that exists already, and also demand for financial reparation. But then what your question is also, how do we think about what is irreparable? Because racism and sexism and capitalism produce irreparability. I mean, if we look at the planet today, a lot of things are irreparable. And even in the past, genocide have erased peoples from Earth. Memory has been burned, I mean, there have been incredible loss. There is an accumulation of crimes. And there is the crimes on the planet that are showing their terrible, result today. So we know that justice for us may not be the Western understanding of like everything can be repaired by money or by, or throwing someone to jail. So justice, thinking about justice would be perhaps, thinking also about what is irreparable. What even, for instance, recognition of a crime is important, but will not necessarily repair my body and my soul totally, fully. So these are, for me, justice is not just the decision and tribunal, and we can imagine what kind of tribunal we want, like what kind of, because sometimes when you have like two parties, you need a third party to intervene between, so it's not a frontal thing, right? You need a third party. So what will be that third party? Community, I've thought about, the different forms of, inventing that third party. Like if, for instance, we know in some community, you will have two parties, one who feel that has been, insulted or damaged by the other. And so the community will decide, okay, then you're going to give him this, or you will repair his house for a year or so that's the third party is important in also deciding justice. So we have to think about what will be the third party that will not be just the tribunal as it has been invented to now, which is mostly, populated by men, and also sometimes, especially the US model is becoming hegemonic of, and it's not about reparation and it's not about justice, but it's about, proving that the person. So all these questions are, about justice. What is the structure? Also, what kind of structure we're going to invent that will do justice? But again, the question of justice is about reparation, really, and has been the form that society has invented. But most society had a form of tribunal, if we want to call it that way, had an idea of what will be the space and the structures through which a damage will be discussed, right? So it's a community meeting, it is not now, but what I mean at that space through which the two party, or, one saying that person has done that to me, and the other person say, but that person did that, so push me to whatever, what's happened. That organization of the third party who judge, is really like, has nothing to do with the West only, it's everywhere, And then you had form of punishment that were not necessarily not necessarily the prison, but could be also very kind of serious, right? You could be sold into slavery. You could be expelled from the community, which was terrible for some, not necessarily possibility of surviving. So justice outside the Western system is not necessarily, nice and good. I mean, can be very also brutal and can be quite, harsh. But so again, I think considering all this, I will say the task of inventing a form of justice. What is the site? What is the space? How people come to talk about their injury, how this is being received is very important, and has been also what victims have, have asked for, what lawyers and have been working on, and feminists and indigenous people. I mean, there is a large theory about what could be justice that will not be just a carceral justice, distributing, years of prison. So yes, violence goes with its remedy, justice. But the point is that what is considered violence today and what is considered justice. But the fact that violence for human beings need to be repaired, need to be acknowledged, and some justice should be done is not just a Western conception. So we could look at this other conception or this other space, but we could also, with all we know about the fact that the way justice is being made, justice is being done, who is considered a victim, why so many crimes are unpunished, what is, and the notion that has been added, crimes against humanity, International Court of Justice, but only black leaders go there. Apparently, we have not seen even a white leader at the International Court of Justice. So we know it's a constant struggle. It's a constant struggle to define what is a crime and what is a justice, I mean, the crime committed against Palestinians are still not crime, so it's a constant struggle. The definition, the clarification of what is a crime and what would be the justice for that crime is a constant struggle. It's not a given. So my answer will be that, yes, it's a process, it's a work, it's a constant work, but what we have to be careful is the US model of resolving everything through, some legal decision. And of course, I mean, and that then there is nothing that must be done. There is no education. There is no, there's not followed. It's not like, for instance, a wide campaign against violence in the school, in the family, what's happened, The murder of George Floyd was not followed by the reckoning on that level. It was in the street, people fighting for justice. But it was also that movement that led the cop who murdered George Floyd finally to the tribunal. And finally, the fact that their crime was recognized as a crime, and that was important. Now, the fact that this guy are condemned to years and years in jail, why not also, So we have also to think, what is it at one point, that a person who is really a threat to society, not in the sense of the patriarchal state and so on, but in the sense of that person does not want to abide with the, of the community understanding of what is, to live together. And so what will, how do we effectively protect the community for that person? So all these are very important, that have to be, but I will say they are constantly being assessed and constantly being, but effectively there have to be some justice. The need for justice is a deep need. It's a deep need. There's not, but the fact that this has been captured by the Western idea about what is the law, what is a punishment, this has to be questioned. And effectively, the prison everywhere, not just in the West, everywhere. But it's a very, justice, the field of justice and crime and defining crime is a very important field for feminists, anti-racist feminists, and it's a very important. I'm sorry for my answer, which are convoluted.
Oh no, that's great. That's why we're here. Does anyone have one last question?
One last question.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's 1 hour and a half already.
Okay, well, if not, I have a really brief one, which I think would be nice to end on, which is just, well, you kept talking, you talked a lot about the imagination and the importance of thinking beyond, the like kind of all-encompassing bleakness of right now. And I wondered if you could tell us if there's maybe a thing or like a book or a thinker that kind of gives you hope or like helps you do this imagination right now. It's a pretty bleak time, so it would be helpful.
It's bleak. It's really bleak time. It's like sometimes there are morning you wake up and you wonder, where do I start? Where do I start? Where and what is this machine? Where is a place in this machine where I can send a stone and it's going to slow the machine, right? Because it's like it's coming to me and I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, so it's I mean, I always have hope. I'm not an optimistic or pessimistic, but I'm a very hopeful person, because I do see, I mean, the young people today are extraordinary. You are extraordinary. I mean, you are the one who's going to, contribute to that, to continue the struggle. It's really, I mean, it's incredible, effectively. There are two things, for me. The fact that everywhere, I mean, I constantly say that, I repeat myself because it's true. There is not one day, every morning when you wake up somewhere in the world, people are fighting for justice and freedom and equality and dignity. There is never a day. And in the darkness of oppression, the people stand up. It's extra. So that is a source of hope. That is the greatest source of hope, the fact. And so effectively, there are moments where we are divided, we are fragmented. It's true also, but we are not that also, lacking so much. I mean, remember the famous sentence of Audre Lorde, we will not dismantle the master house with the master tools, but we have tools since Audre Lorde talk. Tools have been, I mean, we have shelves and shelves of books, I mean, practices, ideas, creation, I mean, filmmakers, poets, novelists, theorists, strike, marches, protestation. I mean, it's an incredible library. We have an incredible library of resources, and we should look at them. And effectively, in the bleakness of time, but because there is also a construction constant of bleakness, there is very few things about that community. We know that during COVID, community organized, abandoned community of color organized so that food will be distributed, people will not be left alone and so on, because the state left them alone and capital could care less. So we do have, and we have to stay confident, we have to remember ourselves constantly of that, because this is what, will tell us, no, they cannot kill that, despite all their effort. And this is why they are so, I mean, they, capital and the state, and racial capital is so afraid, This, I mean, the backlash against, that the former question, the backlash against post-colonial and decolonial, is their fear. They are so afraid because in a way, they have a lot of weapons at their disposal. And as I say, they don't hesitate to kill and maim and torture. But at the same time, they are fragile. There is a fragility because they need to constantly oppress and extract and exploit. If they don't do that, it's very. But so they have the power of weaponry and an army. And as I said, they don't hesitate to just see, one of them, whatever the story about, the responsibility of the West being. I mean, we see that, that there is a man who would understand only weaponry to, push for it. But he's not the only one. If he was the only one, oh my God, we would be relieved. But, everyone is doing it. So there is also a case of what is happening today in the 21st century with so many men in power, absolutely invested in nostalgia for a time where you have an empire, a powerful empire, whether it's the British Empire, the American Empire, the French Empire, or now the Ottoman Empire, or India before the Mughal, or Russia before the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, all these men are like in the past, completely in the past. and they are pretending to talk to us about the future. They are in the past. They want women at home, gay in prison, trans, no trans, they want no joy, no music, no poetry, nothing. They are the most boring people on earth, but they have power. I mean, they cannot stand joy. They cannot stand young people having fun. They can't, So they need to lock everyone. So this is effectively is bleak, But this is effectively, I mean, what we have on our side is effectively a lot of suffering, a lot of mourning, and we need to mourn for everyone, losing their life. But we have also joy. I mean, struggle bring sacrifice, bring effectively, but also it's joy. I mean, these people are. I mean, look at the palace they built or whatever. What it's like they are in love with ugliness. They're absolutely in love with ugliness. I mean, it's incredible. But they are effectively bringing ugliness to the world. They know just one thing: power and ugliness. It's like God. So it's also how to resist is bringing beauty and love, protecting that. I'm not talking like being okay. Let's love each other, kind of Benetton kind of way. I'm talking about real love, real, deep revolutionary love, and so it's not going to be easy. It has never been easy. It has never been easy. It's not going to be easy, but it's also there that we find hope.
I think that's the best possible way to end this. So thank you so much. If people want to put their cameras on, or just you don't have to, of course, but just join me virtually in thanking Françoise for what was a really incredible talk.